This is DW News Africa. Coming up on the program. Is there no end to the killing in DRC? Islamist-linked militias massacred dozens of Christian worshippers during a midnight vigil at a Catholic church in the troubled east of the country. Also coming up, for Nigeria, it is football heaven come true. The Super Falcons clinch the Africa Cup of Nations and bring home the trophy for a record-extending 10th time, reaffirming their place as queens of African football. I am Eddie Micah Jr., and you are welcome to the program. It's the front line in the fight against the so-called Islamic State in the Democratic Republic of Congo. The Islamist militia Allied Democratic Forces, or ADF, killed more than 40 people in an attack on a Catholic church in the DRC. Several houses and shops were also burned in a town in Ituri province. The ADF rebel group, which is backed by the so-called Islamic State, has its roots in neighboring Uganda.
Murdered with machetes, gunned down, or found dead in their burned homes. ADF fighters burst into the Catholic Church, picked out worshippers who were taking part in a night vigil, tied them up and killed them. Children, women, and men. Dozens of the victims were buried in this mass grave.
We are truly shocked. Children and women have been killed. We wonder what the security forces deployed in Komanda are doing. They are not doing their job. They are doing nothing at all. The Congolese army is there. MONUSCO, the UN organization mission in the DRC, is there. But they are doing absolutely nothing.
The attack in Komanda is just one in a spate of recent deadly assaults led by the ADF in eastern DRC. The armed group, linked to the Islamic State, operates alongside many other militias in the region. This just days after the Congolese government signed a roadmap to end the fighting with Rwanda and the M23 rebel group, mediated by Qatar and the U.S. Despite the complex security situation, President Donald Trump seemed confident that he can bring peace.
They liked Trump. They wanted to make a trade deal with Trump. They wanted us to take their rare earth. They want to give us their rare earth. And I got to know the leader of the Congo. I got to know both of them indirectly. And I called them. I said, let's end the war. I don't want anything until you end the war. And we ended the war. As you know, the foreign ministers came up 2 weeks ago, and the leaders are going to be coming very shortly to Washington, Rwanda and Congo.
But in Komanda, where survivors are left to bury their loved ones, any prospect of peace remains distant, hidden behind the haunting memories of the night of terror.
For more on this, let's bring in Raymond Mujuni, a seasoned governance and international relations expert from Uganda. Hello, Raymond. Welcome to the program. Now, this latest attack is just one of several deadly ADF assaults in the DRC's east in recent months. Who exactly are the ADF and what is their connection to Uganda and ISIS?
Thank you so much for having me. Of course, ADF is a rebel group operating out of the eastern DRC. They're an Islamist rebel group which started their rebellion in Uganda, got pushed out of Uganda and moved into the eastern DRC. 4 years ago, the DRC government asked the government of Uganda to go into the DRC and help them deal with the ADF. And for the last 4 years, the Ugandan army has had a presence in the eastern DRC, more specifically to deal with this rebel group called the ADF. They're a very Islamist group linked to ISIS, with links to Al-Qaeda too, and they've been operating out of the eastern DRC and have been cited by the UN to be responsible for gross violations in that part of the country.
Right, right. You know, some figures suggest that the start of the year was the bloodiest since 2002 when DRC was in civil war. Why are the ADF stepping up attacks now?
It's because of this, the fact that you have changing nature of geography within the eastern DRC. The eastern DRC previously was under the control of the Kinshasa government. Since then, we've had the M23 AFC take over most parts of the Eastern DRC. They occupy Goma now, they occupy Beni, and they've become the political and military occupants of the Eastern DRC. That's forced the ADF, which has been traditionally operating in the Eastern DRC, to deal with the AFC and M23, but also the fact that they've got the UPDF on their heels, and the UPDF has been expanding its scope inside the Eastern DRC and launching attacks against them. So one of the reasons why you see a lot of attacks is because, one, they're desperate. They've been moved out of their traditional triangle of death deeper into the Eastern DRC, and they're operating out of areas where they have less food supply, less money supply, and they've got to act very fast to be able to survive.
Right. That's pretty interesting. Some experts are also warning that the ADF fighters could be increasing attacks to remain relevant to counter, regional peace efforts. What do you make of that?
I mean, that could be one of the things to look at. But the ADF have traditionally been relevant as a rebel group fighting in the Eastern DRC to attack Uganda. They've controlled some parts of the Eastern DRC using taxes, using fighting groups, but they've not traditionally been the strongest rebel group inside the Eastern DRC because they don't occupy territory, they don't have political aims in that territory, and therefore, because they have no political aims in territory, their work has been really cut out, which is to stage attacks for the purpose of getting into Uganda.
I see. Well, you mentioned the M23 rebel group. They at least were able to come to the negotiating table and, make some clear demands. Is that even possible with the ADF, who keep committing such massacres?
Well, at the moment, it's impossible because the ADF's fight and war is against the Ugandan government, and the Ugandan government has not indicated any willingness to have any talks with them. The AFC M23 control territory. They have political motivation, and because they control territory, they end up in conversations that are politically motivated around the future of the Eastern DRC. Today, for example, you couldn't govern the Eastern DRC without AFC and M23 because they command the two biggest capitals of the Eastern DRC, and they have political control over them. And they are also borderline with Rwanda. They're at the border with Uganda in Bunagana. So they're a very political outfit. The ADF is not that. The ADF is a terrorist rebel group. They use terror, they use incidents of terror to further their political aims. They're not into political governance. They don't have territory that they command and control.
Right. I mean, what's still interesting, and maybe you can hammer a bit more on that, is that you say the ADF basically, they want to do anything to hurt the Ugandan government, but what did they gain from killing innocent people inside the DRC to get the attention of the Ugandan government? Something doesn't add up there.
So traditionally, the ADF, when they were founded, their first massacre was on Ugandan soil, and their cause is really to use terror as the furtherance of their political motivation. So what you're seeing are attacks that are designed specifically to spark terror within communities and force those communities to work with them. It's been their modus operandi for a long time. Even in the Eastern DRC, in the triangle of death where they were operating, they traditionally targeted civilians and carried out mass massacres just for the purpose of furthering their political motivations. They're not a traditional rebel group that takes over territory and looks to govern and administer that territory. They use the use of terror. They're linked to ISIS, they're linked to Al-Qaeda, and every time they commit these mass acts of terror, they're very quick to claim them so that they can use them for their financing through the ISIS route and through the Al-Qaeda routes.
Right. I mean, look, we're talking about the ADF now. It is just one of about 100 or more armed groups operating in Eastern DRC. Why are there so many militias fighting inside one country?
That's a very long history lesson if we had to get into it, but it's an effect of colonialism because the colonial government parceled out the Eastern DRC in such a difficult way that it had multiple ethnic groups existing on different sides of different borders. Now, some rebel groups in the Eastern DRC are typically defensive rebel groups. They exist to defend communities, their communities, against other communities. some rebel groups inside the Eastern DRC are rebel groups that committed genocide in Rwanda and fled to the DRC, and therefore they're being hunted by the Rwandan government. Some rebel groups like the ADF committed atrocities in Uganda and fled into the Eastern DRC. Traditionally, the Eastern DRC has not been administered by the government in Kinshasa. So it's been a very active hub. It's mountainous, it's hilly, it's very hard in terms of terrain to get along. So it allows for rebel groups to operate there. But something has changed in the nature and texture. I don't think there are still hundreds of rebel groups. Multiple rebel groups have formed coalitions, particularly with the AFC and M23. And now Codeco, for example, there are few rebel groups which are still fighting for the purpose of taking over territory.
Right. Well, at the end of the day, many from the international community are trying to broker some sort of peace inside the DRC because for decades, there's not been peace. Donald Trump just brokered a peace deal between the DRC and Rwanda. Meanwhile, Qatar is leading separate talks with the DRC and M23 rebels. But can such international efforts produce, sustainable peace? Or are they out of touch with the complex realities on the ground? Because it is indeed complicated, isn't it?
Yeah, peace in the DRC is a very complex matter. I think the one peace process that's closer to getting a sustainable and durable peace deal would be the East African community and the South African development community. Those two communities have been together working in what they call the Nairobi process, which is getting closer to a resolution of a peaceful settlement inside the DRC. What we've seen with Washington has been the capacity of Washington to use the US's massive global appeal at a large scale to stop further hostilities, to stop the M23 in their advance, and also get the DRC government to listen to the concerns of the M23. What we saw with the Doha peace process was also a cessation of hostilities between M23 and the government of Kinshasa. That's what those two have achieved, but they're nowhere near a durable peace deal. Please remember that there's been more than 6 different peace deals. In fact, the M23, the name M23 itself comes from a peace deal that was signed in March 23rd and was violated by the Congolese government. So we're still a long mile away from peace.
Still, I like the sound of making progress. Let's look at it as a glass half full, although I understand the complexities you're trying to make here. This upcoming trip to the US that is slated for the leaders of DRC and Rwanda, what's in it for all sides, you think?
I think what the US has been able to achieve is to get the DRC to accept that Rwanda has some valid contestations around the way the DRC and the M23 behave inside the Eastern DRC, and that has an effect on the sovereignty of Rwanda. But it's also been able to slow the advance of the M23 and get them to cease hostilities with the government in Kinshasa. I think that what they will achieve most importantly is to stop hostilities. And because there's been a stop in hostilities, then you can have a path towards peace talks, a path towards integration, a path towards a government, perhaps of national unity inside the DRC. But the closer that the DRC gets to an election, remember, there are many actors inside the DRC who are not represented in Washington. For example, the former president, Joseph Kabila, is inside the Eastern DRC currently. He's not represented in Washington and could be a very big actor in terms of getting peace inside the Eastern DRC. So yes, Washington is a good process, but the key process that will bring peace inside the Eastern DRC remains a Nairobi peace process because that's more representative of all the groups inside the Eastern DRC.
Right. Only time will tell how things pan out. Raymond Mujuni, governance and international relations expert from Uganda. Thank you very much for your insights.
All right. Thank you so much for having me.
Now, Nigerian football fans have been celebrating a remarkable comeback by their national women's team to claim the Women's Africa Cup of Nations. The Super Falcons fought back from 2 goals down to beat host Morocco 3-2 in Rabat. Now, the win confirms Nigeria as the most successful women's team in Africa, having won 10 of the 13 rounds of the Women's Africa Cup of Nations.
After hosts Morocco took an early lead, Nigeria's nail-biter gave way to celebration on the streets of Rabat. Inside the stadium, the Super Falcons struggle to clinch their historic 10th victory took fans on an emotional roller coaster.
It's all good. Nigeria! Exactly! It was tough at the beginning. We lost all, but it's beautiful. We made our comeback and we stood out. And now, what the 10th? Oh my God! These are 10th time. And we're great. We're great. Super Falcons. We're good, man. Ah!
It was a hero's welcome for the team on their homecoming in Abuja. Lifting the trophy for a 10th time was a personal triumph.
Very happy and excited. The team is happy and we're so
A confirmation of the fans' faith in the Falcons and a promise of things to come.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. No be beans. Super Falcons. They're super for a reason.
At any point, at any time, Nigerian women can compete across the globe, which is very important. And it means the women need more empowerment. They need more support because you can see anything they touch turns to gold.
But alongside the praise, critical voices say women's soccer needs pay parity more than a presidential reception.
I have been a consistent advocate for parity in pay, because what these girls have been able to achieve today, the kind of trophies they've gotten to us, we've not seen that with the male team. And it is the same 90 minutes that these girls play. It is the same extra time they also play. So why do you distinguish between the male and the female?
But for now, for fans and team alike, it's about one thing: celebrating the Cup and the Super Falcons' continental dominance.
All right, let's talk sports with Biola Solis Chukwu. She's a freelance sportscaster from Lagos, Nigeria, beaming with all smiles. Hello, Biola. Hashtag Mission X has been accomplished. Nigeria now holds 10 out of the 13 editions of WAFCON. How big a deal is this achievement?
10 out of 13, like you said, is major. I mean, it shows how dominant the Super Falcons are in African football, that's women's football in Africa. In 2022, it wasn't so great. It was actually the Super Falcons' worst edition so far in the WAFCON, coming fourth. But, it's good to see them bounce back again. It's big for Nigeria. It's big for women's football in Africa and Nigeria especially.
Right, no doubt. I mean, how have they been received back home in Nigeria?
The reception has been massive, really. Probably the best, probably the biggest I have ever seen it. It was literally the day after the Women's Africa Cup of Nations that the Super Falcons landed in Abuja, the capital of Nigeria. They were received by the president. They have been given all sorts of gifts, from national honors of OON to flats in Abuja to $100,000 cash for each players. And they even had a concert to wrap it all up. It's been incredible. I mean, I think they deserve all the accolades, all the love, all the gifts. But, there's so much to talk about surrounding that.
Right. Very well deserved. I got to say, I'm a bit jealous. I mean, 3-bedroom house, $100,000. Most of them are sorted for life. But look, behind all the pomp and pageantry, there are still major issues with women's football in Nigeria, aren't there? I mean, what must the government and other stakeholders address urgently?
Like you mentioned, there are so many issues. And while it's good to see the Super Falcons receive a lot of money and a lot of flats, I just keep wondering, if we multiply the $100,000 each player is receiving and, calculate all of it, it's running into billions of naira when you convert it. And if we had probably used all of those monies to develop women's football in Nigeria, it will probably be better now. I mean, we don't have a very successful women's league, I must say, and the grassroots is suffering bitterly. So all of those monies can go into that. I think we need to consider a lot of facilities, putting our league in order as well. I think Morocco, I just have to say this, are a testament to how you can invest in women's football and reap from it. In 2019 or 2020 is when women's football development there really started. And look at it 5-6 years on. The Moroccan women's national team have played only 2 Women's Africa Cup of Nations and reached the final in both editions, played the Women's World Cup for the first time and made it out of the group into the round of 16. That is because investments were made. When you invest in women's football, it will thrive, and that is really, really how it is. It should be in Nigeria, despite playing the World Cup 9 times, despite winning the Women's Africa Cup of Nations 10 times now. It is still not great at home. Imagine what it would be like if from the grassroots women's football is taken care of. We'd probably have won a World Cup by now.
Yeah, most likely. Very valid point there. Grassroots football definitely needs a lot of investment, because if you think about it, with all these challenges, the Super Falcons are obviously doing something right? Winning 10 out of 13 editions. How are other African nations faring overall?
Oh, I think women's football in Africa is growing, to be honest. The level of the football, the quality has increased tremendously, especially from this WAFCON. I saw teams like Botswana, like Algeria, push the Super Falcons of Nigeria. I haven't seen that much competition in a while. We saw Ghana returning to the Women's Africa Cup of Nations after a long time, bringing a new team, a new coach, almost everything new, and then coming third, defeating defending champion South Africa in the third place match. So it has really grown. The quality of football, it has grown. We are seeing, maybe some prize monies increase as well, but there is obvious growth in women's football in Africa.
Right. I mean, cash plays a key role in all of this, as you just ended by saying. On the continental stage, the Confederation of African Football, CAF, has doubled the winners' prize money. The total prize money to be distributed among participating teams has also increased by 45% or so. But is that enough?
When you look at it, you say, oh, wow, it's $1 million now for the winners. And, it used to be $500,000. But when you compare that to the AFCON, that's the men's version of the tournament, where the winners win about $7 million, that is a huge disparity. It is still very, very far away. However, we are grateful for the progress, but more should be done, more can be done. And yes, I hope to see that from the next edition, which is just next year anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, there's also been an interesting debate about calling the competition WAFCON instead of just AFCON. I mean, we don't call, the men's competition MAFCON, do we? Right. So should we just be calling everything AFCON? What do you think?
Well, I think we should definitely know where the difference is, and I'm fine with us calling it the Women's Africa Cup of Nations. I want to see the women there. I need the women to be screamed out loud. So I think I'm fine with that, really, to be honest.
Fair enough. I guess it's less an issue with the name and more about what really goes into the development of the sports. But, the tournament was postponed from last year to this year. It also clashed with the UEFA Women's Euros, and many stadiums in Morocco were only part full. Why is the women's game in Africa overall struggling to get the attention it deserves?
Well, like you said, it was postponed from last year, and that is why in 2025 we are still calling it the Women's Africa Cup of Nations 2024. And like you mentioned, it did clash with the Women's Euros, and it would have been nice to see both tournaments get their own different attention at different times of the year. And I think it also affects next year's championship as well, because in less than a year, about 9-10 months is when we'll be having the next Women's Africa Cup of Nations. We need to understand that even though we don't like to talk about it, women's football in Europe is still bigger than the one in Africa. So if any tournament is going to be given more attention when they are happening at the same time, the Women's Euros will definitely be that. I think there's just this general perception that men's football is bigger, men's football is more entertaining, more fun, and that is why women's football can be overlooked sometimes. And all of that is truly a lie. I think people who mention all those things are people who do not watch women's football and have not paid attention to it. So, those are not true. Women's football is the same, fun, entertaining. Women's football is not slow, as a lot of people like to say. Women's football, if you invest in it, can thrive also. And I think this Women's Africa Cup of Nations should make all of that obvious, really.
Right. Look, Biola, just to be clear, the fact that Nigeria was first, won the competition, and Ghana was third doesn't mean Nigerian jollof is better than Ghana jollof. Just to be clear, we agree, right?
We definitely don't agree. No matter what happens, even if Ghana wins the next edition or the next 10, Nigeria jollof takes it. Forever.
Yeah, well, the viewers know the truth. They know the best jollof. But we'll leave it here. Biola Solis Chukwu, freelance sportscaster from Lagos, Nigeria. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Well, we can agree to disagree. That's where we blow the final whistle. For more of our other stories, go to dw.com/Africa or visit us on social media. We leave you with some images of Nigeria's Super Falcons in action. See you next time. Bye for now.